we have Catherine, and we have Catherine Bohm from Public Works from London, and you just heard Pier Vittorio Aurelia and Martino Tatara. So, and you are more than welcome in the audience to ask questions. You just like raise your hand, and I'll give the word to you. So I start with a question for you, Catherine. And today, before you came, we've talked about both the Swedish post-war housing, the Million Program, which is in much need of renovation. But we also discussed how we can, with small individual architecture and art projects, can make these neighborhoods better. But what do you think? How much can these small-scale projects actually help?
Whom?
Yeah, help in the, helping in the areas, helping to make life better for people in these areas.
I find this contrast amazing, and I'm wondering how much I can hold back, and you can hold back, but we're going to be polite. Maybe not. Our projects are not to help. Is the mic on? Yeah. Our projects are not to help. Our projects come out of a certain concern in our practice, which is either art or architecture. It's about public space. It's about ownership. It's about who is using this. And it's about how much are buildings solutions to certain problems. So they're not about help. They're about supporting public life and public space as is, and coming with interventions or small designs to further and nurture it. But they're not meant as helping projects. They're not, yeah. I think they come from this quite political claim that public space should remain multi-authored, multi-programmed, complex. It should remain a place for production rather than just consumption. But mainly, it should be a place over which a lot of different residents feel ownership. And that's where our projects are placed.
Do you have anything to say on this?
I agree.
Pierre, you agree?
Yes.
You agree too. Okay. What do you think? Do you also think that individual projects could help the cities? You're talking about building these big modules, entities for living in Athens, for example.
Yes, well, they're not big actually, because they are at the scale of the particular problem. I mean, I think that's, as Martino said before, when we talk about large scale, it's not necessarily something about big buildings or big developments. And of course, that's actually a scale in the size that we have usually approached in our projects, but it was not kind of ideological in the sense that, we believe that only if you do this kind of, you work at that scale, you make something good. We thought that for some reason, in the last 30 years, actually, architects have completely abandoned that scale. And that scale is mostly, today, it exists. It has a different, of course, image than ours. And it's the domain of very obscure forms of development, which, thanks to this sort of unclarity, they more and more occupy these territories. So I think that's, for me, both projects like those shown by Catherine or our projects are attempt to deal with that legacy. And I don't see actually one excluding the other. I really want to say that because otherwise the discussion becomes a kind of ideological, unproductive discussion about what is actually the approach. Of course, each approach is different, but I think the problem is the same, which is basically the dealing with a space that is more and more, like say, the ruins left behind the welfare state, which used to be very strong and able to maintain these spaces, now has withdrawn. Let's say since the last 30 years, this process in Europe is very painful because we are so much used to that kind of social protection. And you know, I think as well, the architects, the generation of the 90s, you know, the architects that today have become the so-called archistars were all about, you know, making the nicest sushi bar for the city. I mean, today, of course, we are faced with different problems, which is how to actually take care, let's say, or being sometimes even critical towards these kind of ruins. How to actually make them meaningful places and not just kind of spaces where the only thing that you know, provoke life and social interactions are the usual programs and regenerative strategies that we all know, you know, that have destroyed basically the cities in the last 20 years, and of which gentrification is one of the most perhaps critical aspect.
And I would even add that despite the differences in indeed in scale for sure, but that there is when Catherine say that they're not there to help, in a way it's like when we present, for example, especially like our research for the simple heart, that is not there to help. It's there to make a certain condition explicit and to in a way envision possible in a way to proceed against the condition that in fact now is latent and that it needs recognition. So in fact, I think that within different strategy, within the different tools that maybe the work that has been shown before and the work that we have shown, in a way we share this way that in a way to proceed or to think of a kind of further development and solution of the problem. We have to first of all recognize and acknowledge what the condition that we are in fact living, which could be the problem of a neighborhood, but it could be a problem of in fact our working condition and labor in the city.
Catherine?
I really, sorry, just your shoe. I kind of agree there's similarities, but I think it would be nice to also maybe concentrate on the clash we are having here. Because obviously I'm very resistant to a certain kind of formal illustration. If it's pamphletic, I'm fine. If it's really a proposal for a city, I get quite itchy. For very many different reasons. I think what could be a common denominator or a common term to talk about is the idea of ownership and economy, which in our projects is quite specific because we deal with public space that's in the priority of cases still publicly owned. So it's less about the ownership of real estate, it's more about a kind of mental ownership of the public space you share with others. It's that kind of claim of ownership. But when I look at any of your projects, of course, the concept of economy in a city real estate development suddenly springs to mind. And that's so little mentioned that I wonder how transformative they actually can be if they don't tackle quite fundamental issues of redistributing real estate within cities.
Well, I think it's very important because one of the fundamental, let's say, tactics of the neoliberal city is first of all to make everything informal, so that anybody has to help him or herself. So you don't have any more excuses for large institutions to take care of inhabitants. So there is a kind of Darwinian process through which inhabitants are assigned this role of creating their own space. And of course, this is all nice. You know, it's a very romantic idea, but behind this, Of course, there are strategies to make everything precarious, everything's temporary, everything in a way always on the verge of moving or disappearing, and to in a way create a kind of participatory scenario in which citizens themselves construct that kind of, for me, very dystopian scenario. And that's actually where I would be a bit critical about this participatory model. I think it's very important, and I understand the reasons behind, because in a way it's true that without actually citizens being participants in this process, it's very difficult to actually achieve a meaningful space, urban space. But at the same time, we have to realize that today, more and more, for example, real estate corporations are really engaging these artists, performances, to actually create these kind of conditions in which citizens create this sort of urban life, which then afterwards is parasite to gentrify entire parts of the city. And that's actually where we're a bit critical. First of all, by countering the de-inflation process. De-inflation process is one of the fundamental policy of neoliberalism, which consists in creating scarcity of everything. So you don't have any more social housing, you don't have any more social public space, and one of the rhetoric behind this scarcity is that it's too much. It doesn't serve anybody, it's empty. But of course, one of the reasons why, in the welfare state there was a lot of housing, a lot of development, was to create a certain regime of abundance so that you would not depend on these resources. So for me, in our case, actually, our economic, if you want, framework is to rethink an idea of welfare, if you want, no longer actually centered on the state, but on housing unions or housing municipalities, which would, in a way, control the way real estate constantly create this kind of regime of scarcity in the urban space. And I think that the large scale is an instrument to, in a way, provoke and to create the awareness that these problems are not only happening on the, let's say, micro scale of one building or one institution, but it's a problem that is actually occurring through the whole city.
I think we have a question in the audience. First one over there.
Okay, I think it was really interesting to listen to both of you. But my question was regarding what you started to touch upon now about the role of the state, because I think that's really the big question here. I mean, who is to, in your dogmas proposals, who is to execute this? And you say housing unions or housing municipalities, or some form of, because I would imagine that, I mean, we don't see so much signs of new, strong nation states or welfare states, so it must appear in some other new form, I suppose. But do you see, I mean, you mentioned then housing municipalities. Do you see any signs of these new form of welfare regimes appearing? I would be very interested in hearing more about that.
Well, actually, yes and no, in the sense that I think it will be a very long process. It will take the same time the early industrial unions actually took form. And as you know, there's been a very long process before the first unions were able to have a rather strong power to force government to build social housing or other social services. And I think we will have something like that also now. I think there are signs of that. For example, there are a lot of debates among economists about this issue of basic income. That in a way, since life and production have become basically the same, we produce the moment we even socially interact or we even open our internet, whatever. This, for example, policy, which in times of recession is even embraced by moderate economists, can actually become a new form of welfare, not in the form of wage, which was actually the tradition of a welfare policy, like Keynesian welfare policies, but in the form of affordable and working and living space. And many of the demonstrations that we see happening around the world are demanding exactly that. They are not making abstract, demands like we want to make a revolution. We want to have affordable housing. We want to have affordable office to work. I don't want to depend on the rent I have to pay for my office or for my house, and then I'm forced to do only certain kind of works, like as architects. And I think this awareness today is very strong, is very present. But what is missing is a sort of political recognition of that, or a political organization of that. And that's the problem. And I think we are going through this purgatory, if you want, of representational politics, representational democracy, which has become more and more evident to everybody that is a kind of farce. But I think this sort of new metropolitan metropolitan unionism is something that for me is very important to develop, starting actually also from ideas, from scenarios, from something that maybe is not yet so elaborate in terms of economic and political policies, but it's very important in terms of ideologies, in terms of values, in terms of, in a way, start to think about that sort of possibility.
I think my response would be a bit more practical, maybe. From my experience, the issues of ownership, or from what I know, are still so linked to the different nation states. And claims for social housing, cooperative living, the reality of them so much depends on the regulated or unregulated market of each country. So I think for me, this is still an area where it's actually very interesting to look at national differences, what's possible in which country, why do certain alternative systems develop in certain countries and not in others, and what's then the potential? I mean, I don't understand the Swedish situation, but obviously if most social housing is still publicly owned, that sets a completely different condition to be political about it than the UK, where it's a completely unregulated housing market. The state has basically no power anymore to implement or enforce any kind of action. The private or collective union-like action is very limited as well. It's much stronger in places like I know in Berlin, where it's very possible to set up relatively large-scale collective housing schemes. So for me, this issue of economy claiming and reclaiming is still very much linked to the national differences, unless we want to have a neoliberal system where we kind of unregulate everything and create the same condition for everyone.
But for me, actually, I mean, yes, of course, but at the same time, I really have doubts about this faith in the public, to be honest. I personally, I'm increasingly disbelieving in the idea of the public, because we see that the public, even in very well established, where it's very well established, it's more and more kidnapped by private interest. So in fact, when you talk with developers, and you mention public space, they are more than happy to have public space, because they know that public space today is a fundamental means to raise income of certain areas, to create social cultural activities. So more and more public space becomes the strongest ally of any sort of private interest. And that's actually why in our projects we propose this idea of the common. Because the common, first of all, it's no longer, is transcending the difference between public and private, makes clear that when we talk about production, it's a social production which can totally destroy any attempt to separate between public and private. And in a way also goes beyond the, let's say, traditional distinctions, universals versus individual, and reclaim actually the fact that, the city it's artificially constructed and therefore require this kind of social cooperation, which cannot be fragmented or enclosed in this public versus private, because we know that public today is the way private development is performed. So I would counter that faith in the public with that we have to understand the common is more and more a much more politically useful category to understand this new dimension of production, and therefore a dimension through which to invent new forms of welfare.
So we have one more question over there in the corner. You? Yes. Just raise your hand.
Yes, my name is Tori Sarenius. I'm from the School of Architecture in Oslo. And first I want to, I mean, the question is to Dogma, to Pier Vittore and Martino. I've been very curious of your work for a long time, and it was a pleasure to see the lecture. And my way of understanding your work is very much that it's a kind of fundamental critique of liberal planning.
Yes.
And therefore, I was very specifically interested in one issue about how you said in the project in Korea, in South Korea, about trying to avoid the kind of icon building. And in that sense, I should be really interested to hear more about I mean, as that kind of critique and avoid the icon, how you, in your own work with very strong imagery in some way. So a comment around that should be really interesting. Also, I mean, in one way we can see, I understand your work in some way that you try to back all the way back before Gideon proposes kind of a need for new monumentality. And in the same way, you also work with monumentality in your works.
Well, I start. Maybe I think it's indeed a topic or an issue that we cross our work. The first project of Korea was from 2005, and I mean, the last project that we showed were a few months ago. So it's in something that I think also we have evolved, or that we in a way change also our understanding or the means through which to address the same in a way issue. I think in the case of Korea it was in a way very explicit, in the sense that we somehow proposed an architecture which was without attributes. I mean, opposing the idea of the landscape or the icons in the city, as it was, it became indeed the idea of a cruciform wall, which in fact lacks any attribute. And that's why it was, in fact, even the picture does a kind of white blank wall, because it could be anything in a way. What it was interesting at the time was, in fact, what that space, what that element would offer or generate in the city. In the case of the second project of Korea, it became a very different things, which I think it's also reflect part of our work, where in fact it was not about, it was about this finding an iconography which was on the let's say interplay or on the juxtaposition or composition between in fact built fabric and landscape. Where in fact landscape, the iconography of landscape, of agriculture, for example, was recognized as a much more interesting element through which in fact to build a possible image of the city. So I think that, and I think we could make many other examples in which the same topic has been tackled in different ways. I think even in the work done with the student, in the case of Athens, there is a certain simplicity, I would say, or in a way, iconography which is more based on the experience, I would say, of this space, of the ground floor, of the patios, which is something that, there are all different, in a way through the same topic has been, in a way, developed in our work.
Yeah, but I think your question is crucial because, first of all, I have to say our work is full of contradictions. So I'm the first to be very honest about that, because we don't pretend our work to be a kind of solution or it's a work in progress, full of attempts, which sometimes are some are more positive than others, and that's one thing. The second thing is that I think the iconic, the image, it's an unavoidable dimension for architecture. I mean, today actually you see many architects, or especially young architects, trying to go beyond the image. But for me that's impossible, because especially within a post-Fordist economy, images affect perceptions, are fundamental actually critical tool to basically that ties everything together. So we really want to work critically on that realm of the image, of the construction of, if you want, also certain iconicity of the city. So I don't disregard this aspect. Of course, neoliberalism has produced a very specific language which for me has nothing to do with monumentality, has more to do with branding, where in fact the whole idea is that you exacerbate as much as possible the individual aura of, let's say, buildings, which of course represent the individual aura of the corporations that own them. And our attempt is to develop a form of monumentality which I would define, I mean, quoting the Italian philosopher Paolo Virno, a uniqueness without aura. Something that is, of course, exceptional, monumental, but that monumentality should only want something, the common generic ethos of the contemporary city. And in a way, that's actually why I'm talking about contradictions, because that's a fundamental contradiction in our own understanding of iconicity and monumentality.
Can I? Sorry. Because obviously every kind of monumental format of architecture has in the past been used to introduce and represent political ideologies. That's in everybody's head. That's a very strong image. Everything monumental is normally a repressive political system. How do you get this out of people's head?
Well, I don't believe in that. I think that, first of all, yes, of course, architecture, not only monuments, but architecture itself has been, from its formation as a discipline, an instrument of political, let's say, a struggle, political control from, constituent powers. No question about that, not only monumentality, but the very actually existence of architecture as a discipline, the very practice of architecture has been always instrumentalized by that kind of premises. But that doesn't mean that that kind of premises cannot be twisted in order to introduce other values. And I think that, we show this project about Vienna because for me, it's one of the rare examples in which a constituent class had the chance to build their own city and to reinvent the idea of monumentality, no longer as an expression of a particular institution, but really an expression of a class. And that's, for me, actually, as an example that's shown how monumentality is not necessarily something that has to be repressive, could be also very emancipatory. And we strongly believe in the emancipatory possibility of a monument.
So I think we have 3 more questions, and to be ready in time, we're already a bit past our deadline here, but to answer all of them, we have to keep the answers a little bit short. But yeah, it's first you.
So my question goes to Dogma, and thank you very much for the presentation. I think we share our opinions, but the question from Oslo, it's sort of my issue as well, and you said image is an unavoidable dimension of architecture. I think we all agree about this, basically. Still, I'm interested because you produce a kind of personal imagery, which in a way corresponds with exactly the images that the strong welfare states of the 20th century sort of already produced once. So I recognize the aesthetics of Corbusier, which you picked up, developed, and now produces one again. I like this in a way. My question is, what might your strategy be with this aesthetic reference?
Well, I don't agree with you, actually. Maybe, of course, I mean, you can make your interpretation, it's fine. But I don't agree, actually. Actually, one of the, I mean, I don't know, maybe it's something we never openly discussed with Martino, but so I will tell you my own interpretation of our work. But actually, one of the biggest reference for to be very specific of our images are the work of the Düsseldorf School. I think photography has been very important for us. People like Thomas Struth or Joachim Brom or even the early Andreas Garski, which actually were the first to map and photograph the emerging post-Fordist city. And actually what is very interesting about their work is that on one hand they describe the city, but they also create this kind of distance, which is very much expressed with their flatness. And actually, that has been always our own way of looking to the city. So I think, well, of course, Mies is very important, but I don't think our images have anything to do with that work. Also, the welfare state was much more about open plan, infinite development. Well, actually, if you see Brasilia, which of course is a modernist project, but what is peculiar about the Superquadra is that it's a very enclosed space. Actually, we are very interested in that kind of archetype, which we think was not the archetype of the welfare state city, which, as you see here in Stockholm, in Sweden, was much more about openness, which was a certain faith that was a state, behind. Well, since the state is no longer there, I mean, you have to enclose things. You have to create a different horizon for the city. And that's actually what we are trying to do with our work.
Still, I think you have this effect when maybe when you're sort of staying in contact with architects. I think we are very capable of sort of communicating on this level, communicating with other groups. I think my analysis is one very possibility, so to say, and that's my question.
And we have one question over here.
Yes. It goes a bit in line with Nilsson's question, and I would also just like to draw a line a bit between the sort of theme of the conference today and the presentation by Dogma. And it's really interesting to to follow the sort of catalog of Dogma's work in terms of archetypes. And it's, I mean, I think it's very stimulating for an architect to look at that kind of analysis of the city in a historical context. I mean, I also know that, I mean, you looked at the Roman streets and Place de Vosges and now Karl Marx Hof and also Hilbersheimer, and looking for these sort of catalog of archetypes. And just kind of relating back to, I mean, the work that we're kind of confronting in today's conference is then what we said is the heritage of the welfare state. And it's the heritage of large, one could definitely call them kind of archetypes. And it's also just interesting to see your lecture in the light of this. And you also talk about the new production of spaces and new production of labor, for example, and the sort of capacity in your projects of creating sort of flexible and adaptive structures. That's how I read your interpretation. And that's also something that we have kind of talked about today in the conference. I mean, the heritage of, if we call them, large archetypes, and so the possible change and adaptation to a contemporary sort of political and labor life. And I mean, my question is not clear, but rather just kind of to bring up the topic of what would you say, I mean, in your work, would it be sort of tempting to look at the heritage of for example, the areas that we are confronting in Sweden and Europe?
Actually, when I started to study architecture, of course, Stockholm was the first chapter of the urbanism class, and it was presented to us as the utmost achievements of the welfare state, and the only moment where really urban design had a very effective consequences on the city. Actually, for Italy, Sweden, urbanism was really an example for many urban projects which were done between the 1950s and 1960s. So in a way, that was for us really the basis of our education. But actually, the irony of that was that we were students in the 90s, where actually that legacy was destroy de facto in the city around us. And of course, we had a much more inefficient welfare state than Sweden, but still, it was really dismantled, literally, piece by piece. And of course, for us, the challenge has been always how to reclaim something that, of course, can no longer relying on that particular, let's say, political project. Also, we learned to not idealize too much the welfare state, because we shouldn't forget that, and Svenolo Wallenstein actually explained it to us that quite clearly, welfare state was a way to produce a population of consumers. So when we talk about consumerism, we have to understand consumerism is not a product of the neoliberal, let's say, city, but is a product of the welfare state. And in a way, that's why welfare state should not be totally idealized and seen as a kind of, but in a way, for sure, our projects have to do with trying to reclaim some sort of counter project to the dismantling of the welfare state. And in fact, if there is an echo of the welfare state in our project, it always appears as a ruin. I think ruins are really important in architecture and in the city, because are, of course, often the end of something. But as we know from history, Rome, I mean, the city where I come from, is a good example. It's also the beginning of something else. So I really believe that we should look to the ruins of the welfare state, not just as the end of something of the 20th century, but also as the possible beginning of something that would come after the neoliberal city. And I think the scale, it's a very important clue for that new beginning. That's why I'm really, really critical of these strategies which try to actually infiltrate those large-scale development with all like small activities or small properties that completely destroy the sense of scale of these spaces. I think we should make these spaces much more flexible, much more operative within post-Fordist ways of production, but we should also maintain the scale, because that scale has a political meaning, which is, of course, exactly what the fragmentation of the neoliberal city is right now attacking in a very strong way.
Well, there we have. Is it fine? Okay. You have a small final question. Yeah.
There's sort of a green elephant in the room, and I just want to put it out here. What is your idea around sustainable densification? Sorry, I have to ask this question.
I really, in all conferences and lectures, I have a kind of, I put a constraint. I don't have to mention the word sustainability, because I think that is a Trojan horse of all kind of controversial interest. Of course, it's very important. I mean, no question that we have to, be very responsible toward resources.
Wait, hold on. I said sustainable
but I mean,
densification.
you know how today this issue is completely trivialized, and so I don't mention. I'm not interested in sustainability. Let's put it this way. I'm sorry.
You're designing garden cities with agriculture attached.
Yes, but
I mean, how can you not honestly talk about sustainability? Food miles,
yes.
Who is producing the food? Why don't you want to use the word then? Because everybody's going to look at those images and think this green elephant question.
No, but sorry.
And like by saying this is a formal proposal, sorry, I just don't get it.
Well, actually, I don't think agriculture exists since the beginning of man. So, and this issue of sustainability, first of all, reinforced this idea of scarcity, which I was mentioning before, which I found one of the biggest problems in contemporary urbanism. We have to survive. I hate this kind of idea of sustainability, because it just induces us that we have to survive and not actually have a meaningful life. To live is not just about surviving. It's about having something more than just surviving. And what I don't like about the issue of sustainability and all the architecture that is produced under this rubric, what I call Birkenstock architecture, I hate it, because it's just reducing man to its bios, not to his capacity to survive. I'm really against these values.
What do you do with the people you want to live in your buildings? What if they like Birkenstock? They're not allowed to live there?
Well, actually, yes. I think that I don't think the city should be. I really don't believe in this idea as something that people has to embrace. I mean, the city is not necessarily a nice place. It's a place that has a meaning, has a structure that allow inhabitations, but also allow people to either accept or refuse something.
But the way you describe your proposals is assuming that whoever is going to live there is going to embrace them by occupying those spaces, by strolling through those gardens. You're assuming that your future users are not wearing Birkenstocks and like your architecture. That's what I find really irritating. There's no consideration of what if not? What if it doesn't work? Well, what if no one wants a garden? You're going to pay a gardener to make it look like a garden?
No, I think that is evident by the fact that the images and the project is not selling that argument. That argument is actually a wish or an idea of the project, but we are not actually selling this thing as a kind of solution. I mean, I don't think that is the main issue of our projects. Our projects is just to provide edges, no? Whether it's agriculture or something else, of course, is important. I believe. I mean, for example, I believe that agriculture is a very important aspect to structure a city, but not in a kind of sustainable. Because agriculture, since centuries, has been one of the most incredible tools to create urban form. And that's actually what I found interesting. Not in the fetish of agriculture, agriculture is an urban form that allows the city to have a clear, let's say, legibility. That's actually where we are interested in using agriculture, also in other projects we have done recently, as a tool. But I'm not interested in the fetish of agriculture. I'm not interested in the image of agriculture as a kind of compensation for the inhabitants. It's a possibility. If they want it, fine. If they don't want it, something else will appear there. You know, that's not the way we design. We don't design the desires of people. We design architecture. If people accept or don't accept this, it's another issue. And so our projects are not trying to make everything better, everything more beautiful, are just instrumental to a possibility. That's it.
So, I think that will be the end of this very interesting discussion.